Israeli security service arrests an Arab Israeli on suspicion of being part of a Salafi extremist group and helping two men travel to Syria to join a jihadist organization. Ukraine's army recaptures the Donetsk airport as pro-Russia separatists report at least 30 of their fighters killed. And the Israeli couple killed in the attack at a Brussels Jewish museum are brought to their final resting place in Israel, while questions on the motive behind it remain unanswered.
The news today with Lucy Aharish.
The civil war in Syria continues to appear far outside its borders. Today, Israel announced an Arab citizen of Israel from a southern town had been arrested for helping family members get into Syria to join the fight with an al-Qaeda-affiliated group. More from Maxime Perez and Shahar Peled.
In the Negev desert, it's the first arrest of the Israeli Shin Bet security service of jihadists headed to Syria, a group leaning on one man, Idris Abu al-Kiyan, 23 years old, from the Negev village of Hura. Belonging to a local Salafi organization, the young man was arrested on April 28th and was later indicted on counts of conspiracy and abetting illegal travel out of Israeli territory. He allegedly assisted two relatives in joining the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, one of the biggest and most violent terrorist factions fighting Syria. During his interrogation, Idris Abu al-Kiyan confessed to being in contact with several members of this radical armed group. Their only way of communication, social networks such as Twitter and Facebook. The investigation revealed that these Arab-Israeli candidates for jihad passed through Turkey before reaching the Syrian border. Once there, they were immediately shifted to the care of jihadist rebels. Last month, another Arab Israeli from the city of al-Fahim in the Galilee was arrested by Israeli police. He, too, planned to leave Israel to join armed groups in Syria.
And with me is senior Middle East analyst Ali Waqid. Good evening, Ali.
Good evening, Lucy.
So we have to say that this is a scenario that neither Israel wants to deal with, neither the Israeli Arab community in Israel wants to deal with, and it is becoming a big problem.
It is becoming a big problem. This is true that for the moment we are talking about a couple of dozens of Arab Israelis who joined the rebels in Syria or were arrested before joining the rebels in Syria. But in this case, Lucy, the guy who was arrested is from the Negev. We know that the Egyptian part of the Negev Sinai is a stronghold of the Islamic jihadist group in Sinai. Some of the Bedouin tribes in Israel have family relations with the same tribes in the Sinai Peninsula. So this is not a huge surprise. And we should also remember that the Arab population watch more the Arab international media like Al Jazeera and other than it is watching the Israeli media. Al-Qaradawi, Sheikh Al-Qaradawi and other all the time preach for joining the jihadists in Syria. And this is not a surprise that young are joining the rebels. I think that if it was easier to join the rebels in Syria, if it was not considered a crime in Israel, I would say that more Arabs would be right now fighting in Syria to the side of the rebels.
So if we want to add to all this, we can add the senior Lebanese Canadian commander in the Shiite Muslim who is joined the rebels. This foreign fighters fighting for the rebels, it is something that even the West, and maybe Israel, cannot know how to handle.
I think that the West is now suffering from a huge campaign that is led on the European land by jihadist preachers to recruit young Muslims from all around Europe to go and to fight in Syria. The problem is that we know that once they're back in Europe, they will try to exercise and to practice what they've been trained in Syria, in Egypt, elsewhere in the European land. This is why I think that the Israelis, when they close the eyes about the jihadist campaign in Syria, enjoying the fact that jihadists are fighting a tough enemy of Israel, the Assad regime, must and need to have a clear position, because tomorrow morning you risk to see those jihadists at the very close borders between the Syrian Golan and the Israeli borders.
And let's not forget that these are the rebels and these are the jihadis that the West is arming and the United States is arming in a way.
Turkey is part of NATO, and as we heard in the report, as the guy approved in his investigation, he went through Turkey. We know that the Turkey intelligence services facilitate the transfer from Turkey to the Syrian borders, to the Syrian lands, to the hands of the ISL, Al-Nusra Front, and other jihadist fractions. So the West is in a dilemma. It wants the Assad regime to fall, and on the other hand, the tools to bring Assad to fall are the jihadists that form a threat to the European security.
Ali Waqid, thank you very much for this. A short time ago, the Egyptian Election Commission announced that the voting in the presidential election will be extended one more day. This comes as a result of low voter turnout. Though former military chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is all but sure to win, final results will be published on June 5th, a year after the Muslim Brotherhood's government was toppled. I-24 News reporter Oli Shapira has more.
On the second day of presidential elections, the atmosphere in Egypt is a bit better than the day before. Only around 7% of eligible voters turn up in the first day of the elections. Today, Cairo authorities announced a national holiday to encourage voters to go to the polls.
Egypt needs us, our country and our soil needs us. Everyone must come down and participate in the elections. All of us must raise the Egyptian flag.
The indifference in the Egyptian streets may be the only threat to the main frontrunner, General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. However, he is expecting a landslide victory after winning 95% of the votes overseas. El-Sisi himself set an example and voted Monday morning.
Today, Egyptians are coming out to write their history and to underline their future. The whole world is watching us.
El-Sisi victory seems inevitable now, but his supporters hope for a higher turnout to prove the overwhelming support for him in Egypt. The Islamic movement seems divided in their views on El-Sisi and the election itself. While Muslim Brotherhood supporters announced they would boycott the elections, other factions like the Selfie movement, an extreme Sunni group that holds 27% of the seats in the Egyptian parliament, sound more tolerant regarding El-Sisi candidacy.
Al-Sisi is the candidate who is more able to take us through this phase and achieve stability through an institution that was a main factor in preventing the state as it is now.
Even without the Brotherhood supporters, El-Sisi is expected to defeat his only challenger, Hamdin Sabahi. However, he may discover that winning the general election is the easiest thing to do. The next challenge will be keeping his place in power.
And fighting continues in Ukraine today as dozens of people were killed in the Donetsk airport in clashes between government forces and pro-Russian forces. Meanwhile, the European security watchdog OSCE announced it has lost contact with 4 members of its crew in Ukraine. I-24 News reporter Oli Shapira has more.
Heavy smoke continued to rise from the Donetsk airport Tuesday, a day after a lethal clash erupted between pro-Russian rebels and Ukrainian forces who launched a special operation to recapture the site.
The situation in the city is very intense. The fighting went on until 3 o'clock this morning near the airport.
At least 40 people were killed in the clashes. Ukraine's interim minister announced that the airport is back under their control, but the rebels promise they are not ready to surrender.
The airport is completely controlled. The enemy had serious losses. We have no losses. The operation has been going on in Donetsk since the morning.
We will defend our city. We will fight to the end. It is not the right thing to do to shoot mortars at ordinary peaceful people. A lot of civilians suffered at the train station yesterday. They've been fired at with mortars.
In the meantime, Ukrainian tycoon Petro Poroshenko was officially announced as Ukraine's new president after winning 54% of the vote. But Poroshenko already received somewhat of a cold shoulder from the Russian foreign minister, who only a day before said Russia is ready for dialogue.
The question of Poroshenko's visit to Russia hasn't been studied or discussed by either diplomatic or any other channels.
The Ukrainian parliament sat down today for a first meeting since Poroshenko was elected. With the current crisis in Donetsk, it looks like Poroshenko doesn't have even one moment to spare in his new position.
With me now to look further into the day's dramatic developments in Ukraine is Dr. Elena Bagno-Moldavsky, Research Fellow at INSS. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming.
Good evening.
So, Olena, what is the current balance of power in East Ukraine?
It's difficult to say. As you saw, we witnessed an escalation of the situation, and it's clear that Petro Poroshenko is going to have tremendous amount of trust from the people, and it's probably the consequences of this amount of trust when Ukrainian security forces now adopt a harsher stance toward the rebels.
So how is he going to deal with the pro-Russian separatists?
I think he will try to suppress the rebels by all possible means, also because these rebels are not exactly identified as the Ukrainian citizens. So there is always a shadow of doubt that these are actually insurgents from Russia. That's why he will have an amount of trust from the people and the credit of trust, again, to suppress the rebellion.
So if we're looking, like you said, he's getting into a really, let's say, difficult and complex situation that I don't think that he even thought that he will get in. Who is actually supporting him?
Well, first, he got 56% from the Ukrainian voters, which is an incredible amount of power, especially given the Ukrainian political situation, which is very volatile. So people do support him, but they support him because there's no other alternative. All the other political figures discredited themselves. So he is the best from the worst that they could have had.
So if we want to look about will he get any support from Tymoshenko?
It's a very good question. We know that they are the greatest enemy, and they both were the fellows of former President Yushchenko. So there's going to be an interesting power struggle, but I believe that until the situation gets better and safer for the citizens, Tymoshenko will keep lower profile.
So if we want to look right now at the current situation in Ukraine, can we say that it's a divided country? 100% divided country?
No, not really. I think the country is actually more united than before internally, because there's a kind of new trend emerging, and this trend is a unity against the external force. So I believe we'll have a very interesting new developments in Ukraine in the coming months, but again, it depends on how Poroshenko will manage to use their trust that he got from the people. And it's a very big question that...
Dr. Olena Bagno-Moldavsky, thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Though it's left the headlines for the most part, the families of the 239 people who went missing along with the Malaysian Flight 370 are still left devastated, waiting for answers. Their pressure on the government helped get the raw satellite data released today. But what does the new information reveal? Here's more.
I myself also would not have totally understand it. I know you need expert to look at it. Of course, expert to look at it.
Some experts see the release of the data as yet another attempt by Malaysian authorities to appease the angry families of the 239 passengers and crew who were aboard the plane.
We have placed a line, a special line for anybody who wants to ask any technical inquiries can send their inquiries through that particular line.
Meanwhile, the search for the plane's black boxes continues. An unmanned U.S. Navy submarine, which has been scanning a 400 square kilometer area of ocean floor, is set to conclude its mission on Wednesday, after which the search area will be enlarged to no less than 60,000 square kilometers. Despite the efforts of the authorities, the mystery of flight MH370 lives on.
And we're moving to Thailand. Thailand's military junta now says former Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra has been released from detention and was allowed to return home. Sources close to Yingluck also confirmed that she was released from a military camp. The armed forces seized power in a coup on Thursday after months of turmoil that paralyzed much of the government and caused deadly clashes in Bangkok. Moving to the Palestinian Authority, rival Palestinian factions Fatah and Hamas announced today they have agreed on the makeup of the National Unity Government. Current Palestinian Premier Rami Hamdallah is to be appointed as its head. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas will make a formal announcement of the new government later this week after choosing a religious affairs minister. The CEO of Israeli Defense Ministry has revealed the defense priority of the Israeli government. According to the report, the cost of Israel's special means under the Prime Minister's direct control, considered as nuclear-related, stands at $1.3 billion and will increase by $170 million this year. And now, if we're talking about Israel, let's go to Inside Israel. And joining me, like every night in the studio, is I-24 News correspondent Eli Ochenberg. Good evening, Eli.
Good evening, Lucy.
So today, we already spoke about it here. After a year-long undercover investigation at the Ashdod port, 15 people were arrested on suspicion of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. Before we talk about the power of the union ports in Israel, let's see the report.
Israel's anti-corruption police arrested 15 current and former port workers in an early morning raid in the city of Ashdod. The 15, including a number of senior officials, are suspected of being part of a corruption ring at the port and were arrested as a result of a year-long undercover operation. The suspicion is that the workers exploited their standing to promote the interest of private companies owned by their relatives. They are alleged to have pressured companies operating at the port to hire services of family companies in return for bribes and benefits. The suspects were detained on various charges, including abuse of office, bribery, breach of trust, extortion, fraud, and money laundering. The detainees include officials at the port who are employees of the state and others who work at private companies based at the port. In addition, a high-profile billionaire and his partner were questioned. Ashdod's port is a major cargo and container getaway for Israel, along with the port in Haifa. In recent years, the option of privatizing Israel's ports has become a major issue and raised the public's attention, especially over the high wages and a series of labor union actions there. But the move was repeatedly delayed following threats to paralyze the port. These current allegations may just be the scandal that sparks a change.
It's not a big surprise. You cannot say neither Israelis nor the port workers were surprised this morning. It's a known fact for many, many years that the Ashdod port is very similar to the mob in many ways. Nepotism, high salaries, and extensive power of the workers' union there. All of this and much more turned this port to be one of the most intriguing governmental businesses in Israel. And with King Alon Chazan, the chairman of the union, ruling peacefully and with only little disturbance. And the most important thing, Lucy, with government officials allowing this to happen.
And they've been basically closing the port in Israel.
Absolutely, paralyzing every once in a while. And following all of the above and many, many other reasons, there have been intensive discussions in recent years to privatize the port, but no concrete conclusion was made. And it's safe to assume it will happen eventually, maybe with this story very soon. Let's hear if Israelis think this is the solution.
Let's see.
I think the Israeli ports must move to private hands, mainly because it's a better growth engine than the government.
I think they should be governmental and not private, with better inspection regarding regulations, which has to be tight.
The ports should be in the government's hands. The world's research has proved that private equals not for the benefit of the public.
I think that the ports, just like all the vacant beaches in Israel, should be under the responsibility of the government and the public and not in private hands.
You know, I wonder if it was a surprise when they were arrested today.
It wasn't a big, for them maybe. For them maybe, yeah.
Really? Do you think that it
no
was
one
a surprise
caught them
for
for many
after
years?
Everybody's talking about them and the way that they're handling the ports and everything. Well,
but, they got out of it until now.
I hope that they will have a good steak while they're waiting to be investigated.
You're so kind, Lucy.
I'm so kind. Elio Gomberg, thank you very much for this. And we're going out for a small break, 2 minutes break, and then we will be back for the daily question. Don't go anywhere, 2 minutes, and I'll be back. The Israeli Security Service arrests an Arab Israeli on suspicion of being part of a Salafi extremist group and helping 2 men travel to Syria to join a jihadist organization. Ukraine's army recaptures the Donetsk airport as pro-Russia separatists report at least 30 of their fighters killed. And the Israeli couple killed in the attack at a Brussels Jewish museum are brought to their final resting place in Israel, while questions on the motive behind it remain unanswered. Welcome back. Following a surge in support for the Eurosceptic and far-right parties this week, questions are being raised on the EU itself. For his part, French President François Hollande said the reality of the vote must be confronted and that the EU should reform and its power reduced. Today on the Daily Question, we ask you, should the EU scale back its power after the rise of the far right in recent elections? And joining me like every night is I24 News editor Nurit Zanker.
Good evening.
Good evening. And also Emmanuel Navol, international relations expert at the Tel Aviv University. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening.
So we will get back to you just in a short while, but before that,
the one thing, and maybe the only thing, that all European leaders seem to be able to agree on right now is that the EU needs to change. Whether it's the left center or Marine Le Pen's Front National, everybody is saying, rushing to comfort the people, change is going to happen. Let's take a look at what the global poll shows. I24 News poll shows the majority, 54%, say yes, the EU should have its power reduced following these kind of shocking elections. 37% say no. So I want to start with the majority and with Alan McIntyre, who gave a sort of harsh response that, to be fair, we have to read. You all really still do not get it. People are patriotic. They never signed up to or voted for losing their sovereign rights, so he's very clearly anti-EU.
Yeah.
It's a socialist venture designed to force financial parity upon all citizens of Europe by flooding the rich countries with the poorest and so on. And he goes on to cite also in a very long response that the wealthiest countries are not part of the EU and they do what they like. So you have this position, which is also reflected by Marine Le Pen in France, the far-right party saying this is
but when all the countries that has money are in the EU, this is what makes the whole deal even bigger.
The whole economic aspect here is something a lot of people are talking about. And Merkel, Cameron, Hollande, all of them are talking about how we have to make economic reforms now to satiate the people, so to speak. Marjorie said something else. She said people need to feel that their voice was heard, otherwise it'll be worse next time. So this really taps into what these leaders are doing. The ones who didn't fare so well, like Hollande, are saying, calm down, we'll deal with it and we're going to make change. Kathy, on the other hand, she says the states must become stronger to make decisions closer to the needs of their citizens and not be a victim of the decisions of Europe. So a lot of people who are against the EU's power are saying you have this giant body which does have quite a lot of power, the parliament has a lot of power, making decisions that they shouldn't be making for us.
When you see a group of people who is actually discussing a lot and sitting a lot and talking a lot and not actually doing something on the ground in a lot of cases, sometimes
and we're talking about 28 states too. It certainly is a big
why they need to be there,
a big goal here.
So why they need to be there? Emmanuel Navon, you're joining us again. Good evening.
Good evening.
If they're all talk and no action, why do they need to be there?
Well, I think that we have to realize the difference of the different results between the different European countries that voted. There was a raise in more radical parties and Eurosceptic and anti-Europe parties. It was mostly in the countries that faced economic challenges and that have not reformed their economies for the past 20 years, especially in France, in Italy, in Greece. Other countries, such as Germany, which did implement economic reforms since the beginning of the 21st century, did not have such a surge of anti-EU policies. Even the German party.
Dr. Navon, unfortunately, we are not seeing you and we're not hearing you very well.
So let's hear our viewers.
Yes, let's hear the viewers.
Instead, let's go to the no side, those who said that the EU is okay as it is and it doesn't need to be dissolved or its power reduced. And another long response, but I think worth reading, Clemens Whitwer actually compared the American Civil War to what's going on now. He said, 1861, USA, backward-looking racist enemies of modernization try to dismantle the Union to indulge in their 19th century way of living. He goes on to say how a president took them out of it and remade the Union. And then he goes on to say, 2014 EU, again, backward-looking racist enemies of modernization try to dismantle the Union. So he compares directly these two things. It's an interesting idea and says that a skillful and strong president will lead the Union to a painful struggle against their enemies. So he's optimistic that a strong EU president will carry them through this and come out stronger in the end.
Yeah, I'm trying to see the current situation, and unfortunately we didn't hear very good the answer, but again, how come they have so much power but they don't do anything with it?
Well, I think one of our viewers maybe has an insight into that issue, because she says, Emmanuel, she says, I don't believe that the power of the EU should be reduced. It should be better explained to Europeans. Now, who knows exactly what European institutions do? It's because of this ignorance that we got these results. So maybe they are doing effective decisions, but as Emmanuel says, the people aren't aware of that. It's this massive body. It has a lot of power, making a lot of decisions, and especially at a time of economic downturn, maybe it's also a PR problem. Maybe the EU needs to clarify what it's doing more.
You know, on the other hand, we are saying that we want to live in a democratic world, and we want the world to see that, and we know that in the world there are a lot of opinions. And maybe this opinion should be heard as well, so we will know how to handle things in the future better.
Absolutely. Also, we heard some similar things to that. Philippe Malard said, you can't reduce the powers due to results of democratic elections. We do not change the rules in the middle of the game. So he's kind of saying what you brought up, that this is what the voters voted for. Now you have to look at it and see, accept that result and see what can be done.
One last comment, if you have.
Let's just end on Catherine, who said, no, but we need a clearer policy not made by anonymous, omnipotent officials in Brussels that don't take into account regional peculiarities. So today, the meeting in Brussels, maybe they'll at least come out with something that can get more clarity
and
on the
we're definitely going to speak about it in the daily debate in an extended way. More extended than this in 8 minutes. Louise Iver, thank you very much for this. And we're going out for a small break, 2 minutes break, and then we will be back for the rest of the news today. Don't go anywhere. The Israeli Security Service arrests an Arab Israeli on suspicion of being part of a Salafi extremist group and helping 2 men travel to Syria to join a jihadist organization. Ukraine's army recaptures the Donetsk airport as pro-Russia separatists report at least 30 of their fighters killed. And the Israeli couple killed in the attack at the Brussels Jewish Museum are brought to their final resting place in Israel, while questions on the motive behind it remain unanswered. Welcome back. This afternoon, the funeral of Emmanuel and Mira Riva, murdered by a gunman at the Brussels Jewish Museum on Saturday, took place in Tel Aviv. Back in Belgium, at the scene of the shooting, the leaders of France, Italy, and Belgium paid their respects. More in the next report.
3 days after the deadly attack on the Brussels Jewish Museum, the search for answers continues. In the shocked Belgian capital, authorities are currently classifying the murder as terrorism and continue to hunt for the perpetrator. In Tel Aviv, hundreds of friends and relatives accompanied the Israeli victims of Saturday's attack to their final resting place. Belgian prosecutors have denied reports of an arrest and are still investigating the incident as a terror attack, even though other scenarios haven't been ruled out.
The facts took less than 90 seconds. This, combined with the fact that the shots were fired inside the Jewish museum, makes us believe that the crimes were committed with a terrorist motive.
3 people were shot dead in the attack, with a 4th victim dangling between life and death in hospital. The coffins of the Israeli victims, Emmanuel and Miriam Mira Riva, both in their 50s, were transferred to Israel late last night and brought to rest in the afternoon. Both held diplomatic and security positions in Israeli government agencies in the past, sparking media speculations that their murder was not a terror attack or hate crime, but rather a targeted assault in a covert war. But for the Rivas' loved ones, particularly their 2 teenage daughters, aged 17 and 15, the motive is irrelevant, and they are left with the grief and mourning.
No words can console you on this terrible day. But be assured that the Belgian authorities will spare no effort in order to identify and arrest the perpetrator of this crime.
Back to Brussels, outside the Jewish Museum, a spontaneous memorial draws visitors honoring the victims of the shooting, and security measures have been increased at all Jewish institutions. Saturday's attack, the first in more than 30 years in Belgium, has rattled Jewish communities across Europe and revived fears of a return of violent anti-Semitism.
Of course, that was a report from our I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev, and with me now in the studio is Amir Oren, defense and government analyst for Haaretz daily newspaper. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming.
Lucy.
So, as you published in Haaretz newspaper, there is something behind in this story.
Perhaps. One has to look at the various leads and possibilities here. The fact of the matter is a murderous attack by a lone gunman in a Jewish target, leaving 3 victims dead, 2 of whom were former Israeli government officials, minor officials, who were accountants, bookkeepers, but nevertheless had affiliations with governmental bodies. This brings forward the possibility that the gunman did not act at random, but perhaps chose his victims. Perhaps it was a case of mistaken identity. Perhaps they met with someone they knew from the government service before they entered the museum. And therefore, a prudent line of inquiry would be to track the movements of the victims before they reached the museum, to see whether they met someone else and whether security cameras captured their movements before they entered the museum and not only when the attack took place.
What do we know about the couple?
We know that they had similar jobs in accounting, in the accounting departments of various government bodies. The husband, Emmanuel, first worked for the Ministry of Finance. He then joined an organization having to do with Jews in the Soviet Union and other places adjacent to it. And then his wife was also brought into government service. However, they only had jobs in the back office, or when she was sent to Berlin, she also had an administrative chore rather than the core business of these security organizations.
And if we want to look who might be standing behind this attack, who could it be?
So ruling out a personal vendetta against this couple for some unknown personal reason, there are many Muslim extremists who might have gone back to Belgium from Afghanistan or from Syria, Iran, Hezbollah, other entities with a covert fight against Israel. And remember that Israel, too, at times mistook an innocent Arab for a terrorist leader it pursued. And sometimes when nuclear scientists are being killed in Iran, the Iranian government announces that they were only administrators. So mistakes can happen.
Yeah, and when you look at the footage, maybe you can explain why it looks so professional.
True.
Amir Oren, thank you very much for this.
Lucy.
European leaders are gathering in Brussels this evening for a post-mortem of sorts, looking to the next step after elections saw the breakthrough of nationalist, Eurosceptic and anti-immigrant parties. French President François Hollande set the tone by calling for changes to a, quote, remote and incomprehensible EU, while others have echoed his call for reform.
The European Union cannot just shrug off these results and carry on as before. We need change. We need an approach that recognises that Europe should concentrate on what matters, on growth and jobs, and not try to do so much. We need an approach that recognises that Brussels has got too big, too bossy, too interfering. We need more for nation states. It should be nation states wherever possible, Europe only where necessary.
And with me from London is I24 News correspondent Jonathan Sacerdoti. Good evening.
Good evening.
So, Jonathan, what are the main headlines from the EU leaders in Brussels?
Well, politicians are scrambling to pick up the pieces after the much talked about political earthquake that hit parts of Europe, with those outsider parties, some on the extreme right, winning more seats than ever in the European Parliament. But the aftershocks of that earthquake are still to come, and that's what is causing so much uncertainty for European leaders as they meet tonight in Brussels. They're gathering there to discuss how to move on in the light of the election results. And on arrival there, as you just heard, David Cameron said that Brussels has got too big and too bossy and too interfering, echoing some of the battle cries of the UK Independence Party, UKIP, which triumphed so in the elections for the UK. So it's already apparent that these new parties and their presence in the European Parliament is having an effect on the established parties and their rhetoric.
So you just mentioned UKIP. In what means can Prime Minister David Cameron deal with the growing power of UKIP?
Well, all of the main parties here are now deciding how they should react to this victory and popularity for UKIP. Tony Blair, the former Labour Party leader and former Prime Minister, of course, said today that he advises Ed Miliband, the current Labour Party leader, not to bow to these views on immigration and to change Labour Party policy. And similarly, David Cameron is trying hard not to change the Conservative Party policies on Europe and immigration, but just to speak tougher about the policies that the party already has. And that's exactly what he's doing now. He's already speaking tougher about how he would like to change the EU, something he used to discuss regularly, but without many specifics. And now he's going to try hard to show that the Conservative Party can offer Eurosceptic voters an alternative to UKIP by talking tough on Europe and getting back some control for Great Britain. As he said there, getting more control for nation states for themselves and allowing Europe control only when necessary.
Yes. Jonathan Sacerdoti, thank you very much for this. In Nigeria, the search for the abducted schoolgirls continues. The country's chief of defense staff says the Nigerian military has located them, yet the air marshal offered no information as to how the military plans to recover the girls. I24 News correspondent Nelly Ochenberg with the full story.
Nigeria's military knows the location of the over 200 girls abducted by Boko Haram. That's according to a statement by the Chief of Defense Staff Air Marshal Alex Bade.
The good news for the girls is that we know where they are, but we cannot tell you. Okay, we cannot come and tell you military secrets here. Just leave us alone. We are working. We will get the girls back. 7
weeks after Boko Haram militants abducted more than 200 girls taking exams in a secondary school in the remote northeastern village of Chibok, little is known of their location or what the military is doing to get them out. Most Nigerian officials think any raid to rescue them would be followed with danger and is probably not worth the risk that the girls would be killed by their captors, an Islamist group that has shown ruthlessness in killing civilians.
We have Al-Qaeda in West Africa. I believe it 100% because I know that people from outside Nigeria are in this war. They are fighting us. They want to destabilize our country, and some people in this country are standing with the forces of darkness. No. We must salvage our country.
Since the girls were captured, at least 470 civilians have been killed by Boko Haram, which says it is fighting to establish an Islamic state in religiously mixed Nigeria. The UK, the US, China and France are among the countries that have sent teams of experts and equipment to help to locate the girls after a transcontinental campaign to the rescue, led by the First Lady Michelle Obama, was gaining power. Reports on Monday said a deal had been in the works to rescue the girls in exchange for Boko Haram prisoners, a demand the group had made public, but that it was called off at the last minute.
Yes, and the Pope, one last Pope for us. The Pope has left the Holy Land with a call for peace and also with a few unforgettable moments and experiences, concluding in a surprising invitation. I24 News correspondent Shahal Pellet takes us on a look behind the holy visit.
It was a busy 55-hour visit for Pope Francis in the Middle East, touring religious and political sites. But the leader of the Catholic Church knew in advance what he was getting himself into.
It will be a very challenging trip.
First landing in Jordan, tens of thousands awaited his first ever Mass in the country.
I have been here since 9:30 because we wanted to make sure we got good seats and we wanted to be sure to get in time and not to miss anything.
According to a Jordanian priest involved in the planning, the Pope largely set the itinerary himself and declined to have an official state dinner at the royal palaces in Amman, reportedly eating on his plane instead. Whether a choice of modesty or a political stance, his next move was definitely the latter. Flying directly from Jordan to the Palestinian territories was no accident. The Pope and his entourage managed not to cross any Israeli military checkpoints and landed straight in Bethlehem in the West Bank, the birthplace of Jesus, but also an unofficial statement of solidarity with the Palestinians. Perhaps that might explain the reception ceremony in Israeli Ben Gurion airport, which was surprisingly poorly attended by the Israeli government. Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman, Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon, Finance Minister Yair Lapid, and even Head of Parliament Yuli Edelstein all sent different excuses and substitutes on their behalf. But that didn't stop all the parties from smiling, even after the Pope's unplanned prayer on the security separation wall, which provided the most dramatic image of the visit. Soon to cause discomfort on the Israeli side, an alternative unscheduled photo op was provided, that of the Pope beside the memorial for Jewish terror victims.
We are not into the blame game. We're not into all of this. We want to promote peace. And we're not into what this side did and what that side did. We're trying to be constructive.
His second day in Israel and final day of the trip was a full one indeed. Greeted by scores of Muslim, Christian and Jewish children, the Pope's content was clear. Even a small incident couldn't ruin the good atmosphere. A rather amusing debate with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu regarding the speaking language of Jesus Christ.
Jesus was here, in this land. He spoke Hebrew.
Aramaic.
He spoke Aramaic, but he knew Hebrew.
As the grueling trip came to an end, a tired-looking Pope Francis boarded his plane back to Rome, but not before presenting an unexpected invitation, a June 6th meeting at the Vatican with presidents of the two sides of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This diplomatic intervention took place only a week after Netanyahu's reprimand of his own negotiator Tzipi Livni for discreetly meeting the Palestinian president. Whether the Pope is successful in his mission or not, his upcoming bold political gesture might tell.
And now to economy. And with me now is financial analyst Lionel Friedfeld. Good evening.
Good evening, Leslie.
So we looked at the political aspect. Now let's look about the economy aspect of the EU election. And it seems that it wasn't a surprise for...
No, exactly. It wasn't a surprise. The financial market took it very well. They all went closed yesterday on a green level. They took it as mostly as a warning. It's not a direct threat to the European economy. And if you took example, yesterday in Frankfurt, the German stock market closed plus 1.21%. The CAC 40 in France closed plus 75%. And there was a big rally in Italy that closing at 3.61% following the Democratic Party in Italy that won the election. And actually investors are boosting investment into Italy. And this morning they issue a €4 billion bond that investor took part of it.
Lionel, I was told that if you want to try to predict the future and to understand a little bit more about what is going on in the political arena, you should look at the economy. And in this case, the economy kind of predicted what is going to happen.
Exactly. It's a vote of confidence for the Eurozone. And if you look, we spoke about the equity market. If you look into the bond market, the pricings are very stable. If you look at the bond market for French market or the bond alone for the German market, they're 180% and 141% for Germany. So this is very stable. If you look also the forex exchange, the parity in between the euro and the US dollar was very stable also. So you see that the financial market integrated the fact or the outcome of the political election, and they have confidence in the Eurozone.
So when we see this shift to the right, how we're going to translate it to the money, to economy?
I mean, the financial community is not that worried because the shift to the right is only to a minority, even if the minority is very high in France, 25% with the FN, or in the UK also with really right parties, in Greece as well, and in Germany also with NPD being elected. So the white parties doesn't manage yet Europe, and Jean-Claude Juncker is expected to be the next president, but there are still negotiations between France, Germany, and Jean-Claude Juncker belongs to the PPE, the Conservative Party. So it doesn't mean that tomorrow Europe is going to be governed by the right wing.
So you know what? Next time that I'm going to be worried from the political situation, I'm going to call you.
It's a pleasure.
Lionel Friedfeld, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, in the past, Western artists threw charity concert to aid Africa. Nowadays, local artists are creating their own charity singles to benefit their countries. One Africa is one such example, calling for peace in the Central African Republic. Daniel Campus brings us a history of charity music and the latest developments.
One Africa is a new charity single calling for peace in Central Africa. The song was released by Idil Mamba, Christian musician from the war-torn Central African Republic, and world-famous musician Youssou N'Dour, a Senegalese Muslim. The video has become viral on YouTube and on social networks with the intention of promoting coexistence, peace, and unity in the country. The Central African Republic is currently being affected by some of the worst sectarian, ethnic, religious violence in its history. The song follows the tradition of previous music charity efforts, such as in 1971, ex-Beatle George Harrison and Ravi Shankar. They organized a concert for Bangladesh and also recorded the single Bangladesh, the first ever purposely made charity single to help fundraise efforts following the 1970 Bola cyclone and the Bangladesh Liberation War. The money raised was donated to UNICEF. In November 1984, Band-Aid's Do They Know It's Christmas Time, composed by Irish singer Bob Geldof, which raised money to relieve those affected by the famine in Ethiopia. The song featured Bono, Phil Collins, Boy George, and many other stars of the era, and was popular throughout the 1980s. In the United States, charity records reached their peak in 1985 with We Are the World, a song and charity single released to support relief efforts in Ethiopia, originally recorded by the supergroup USA for Africa. The song was written by Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie and produced by Quincy Jones and featured musicians such as Stevie Wonder, Cyndi Lauper. Sales of the single exceeded 20 million copies, and it remains the best-selling charity single in history. In recent years, a new revolution of independent charity music has been taking place in Africa. Now musicians can make their own charity singles without having to rely on Western celebrities and the platforms of the past. For example, in 2012, a group of popular musicians from the Democratic Republic of Congo united to record the song Stop the War, calling for an end to the violence and ongoing war in the country, considered one of the deadliest in modern-day history. The music video went viral on YouTube and social networks. In 2013, Voices United for Mali, musician Fatoumata Diawara gathered over 40 musicians from different ethnic groups and regions of Mali to record a song calling for unity and peace in their homeland, while the country was in crisis, battling against Islamic extremists and separatists. The music industry goes through big changes, and music studios and distribution platforms are becoming more accessible to everyone. can expect to see the phenomenon grow, ushering a new era in African self-made charity music singles.
And with that note, to sports. And with me is the host of I-24 News Sports Magazine, Jonathan Regev.
Evening.
Evening.
How you
Hello.
doing?
I am good. You?
Fine, thank you
look
very
a little
much.
bit tired.
A little bit. I've been working. Sports Magazine takes its toll.
So, FIFA President Sepp Blatter is here.
Yes, he is.
And we are already causing him a lot of trouble, the Israelis and the Palestinians.
I think that's what us and the Palestinians were meant to do, causing trouble to the world. Sepp Blatter came to Ramallah and to Jerusalem. He met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and head of the Palestinian Football Federation, Jibril Ajoub, yesterday in Ramallah. They expressed their concerns over what they called the problems Israel is causing for the traffic of Palestinian footballers. They say that the players cannot go from place to place, therefore they cannot join their teams, join their national team. And they called on Sepp Blatter either to do something, and they said that in the next FIFA assembly, which will be adjourned right before the World Cup in Brazil, they will call for the boycott of Israel on this matter, on this concern. Today, Blatter met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and head of the Israeli Federation, Avi Luzon. They said that this is a political matter, not a sports matter. Therefore, Israel cannot be boycotted on a sports note on this issue. And they also said that despite security concerns, restrictions for Palestinian athletes has been eased. I'm sure you have done a lot of political items which sounded just the same.
Yeah, I thought that you're not going to come and tell me again.
We love to say that sports and politics should not be mixed, but this is the Middle East, so...
No, it's only in the Middle East. I cannot believe that, again, we are dealing with the Palestinians. They cannot even play football together.
No, but I should say that Sepp Blatter said he will love to come back here for a friendly match between the Israeli and the Palestinian national team. You know, Barcelona was here last year, and Israelis and Palestinians could not even agree on who will be the players that will play against Barcelona,
Jonathan,
so they had to do it.
Don't get me started on the Palestinians and the Israelis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy.
And we're going out for a small break, 4 minutes break, and then we will be back for the I-24 News Daily Debate. Don't go away.